Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat.
Good morning and a very warm welcome to Newsline, live from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo. And joining me this morning is Dr. Jayatillaka. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning, Faraz.
And how are you?
Well, that's always a difficult question to answer, but on balance, I'd say I'm fine, thank you.
Good, but you're here early, on time and so on.
Well, frankly, it's only you who could have got me up and out and into a studio this early in the morning, but...
thank you very much. Prince Hussein has been to Sri Lanka and gone away. What did he hope to achieve by coming to Sri Lanka?
Well, I think he hoped to check out on the implementation of the 2015 resolution and give it a bit of a nudge, shape the outcome. I think he must have been briefed that things were somewhat in the balance. The Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister being quite gung-ho about implementation, the President being more nuanced, a little more cautious, and my guess is that Prince Zaid wanted to give it a bit of a hurry up, and that's what he's tried to do. He's also spoken out of turn, but that's something you might want to talk about later.
So what has he achieved, do you think? He's been here, he's gone on a very quick tour to the north and the former conflict areas and so on. And what I call the troops have been rolled out, replete with all their photographs of people who are missing. But the government has already started on this. They haven't been waiting for Prince Zaid to come here. We've already started. So every now and then when you get these people coming along, isn't it a bit of causing a bit of, you sort of tend to how shall we put it, cause a bit of turbulence, because the diaspora pick up on these things from a PR perspective, and then they give it all this publicity. Oh, well, they're not doing this or they're not doing that. Will things change when people keep coming and the victims keep showing the photographs of their loved ones missing? Will it change?
Well, for us, it's always good to have visitors.
Indeed,
it's nice to have one's doors and windows open.
Yeah.
But when the visitors all come from one direction, and tend to sing from the same hymn sheet, that's a little disconcerting. Sri Lanka, in its foreign policy, seems to have swung from an east-centric to a west-centric position instead of sticking to a middle course. So the direction, the thrust of all these visits is perhaps causing some dissonance. And as for victims, the High Commissioner himself seems to think that all the victims, or most of the victims of the Sri Lankan conflict, were in the north and east. He keeps talking about the victims, and that whatever the process, it must never be said by the victims that it was not enough. The process of justice and truth-seeking, accountability. Now, that's really quite misleading, because any responsible government, especially in a democracy, has to take into account a number of factors. Justice for victims is one of them. Stability, the national interests, the interests of the state, the views of the Sri Lankan Armed Forces, these are other variables that any responsible government has to take into account. It cannot be simply one-dimensional. And the more important point, perhaps, is that the victims do not belong to any one community, not even preponderantly. To the extent that the Tamil Tigers were Tamil, then of course most of the victims were Tamil, the casualties of war. But when we had 30 years of suicide bombing in all parts of the country, the whole country was a battlefield, and every single community has yielded victims. No single community or province in this country has a monopoly of either virtue or vice. And the Human Rights High Commissioner does not seem to have understood this.
Also, the matter of the displaced who seem to have been forgotten, the people from Mana, the Muslims from Mana, who were given 24 hours to leave and left with only what they had on what they were wearing. Their gold was confiscated and so on, was robbed by the LTT. And they're still in that camp's about 30 years old in Puntland. No one's talking about that with any real sense of urgency, but they are displaced.
Well, there are many such issues for us, and I'd hate to term them residual, because if you are in a camp, it's really not nice when somebody refers to your problem as residual.
Yes.
But a comparative perspective would tell us that we made a much faster recovery, not just in terms of reconstruction, but in terms of demining, resettlement, that have most countries after wars of that intensity, or anything comparably of that intensity. So we haven't done too badly. Just as we didn't do too badly in recovery from the tsunami, when you remember what happened to after Katrina in Louisiana. So I think we moved forward fairly fast.
Yes, but talking about, I think I used the word residue yesterday, so Sean, but talking about the balance, the people who have not been rehoused and so on, and there are still some of them. Obviously, these cases are more difficult because their lands have been, most of them have been in the occupation of the armed forces. Now, isn't it time that the armed forces packed up and went away?
Well, for us, the High Commissioner had made what I regard as a somewhat gratuitous reference about the withdrawal of the armed forces, that more of them can be withdrawn. Look, anywhere in the world, when you've had a 30 years war, even a much shorter one, the armed forces tend to stay on in those areas. Now, after the American Civil War, the Union forces, the northern armies, remained in the former Confederate States for 12 years.
Right.
And there weren't, the Confederate States didn't have core ethnics across the border in South America.
Right.
So the northern east of Sri Lanka has been the womb of a suicide bombing terrorist army, which sustained itself for 30 years. The war has been over for just 6 years. It's also a border zone across which you have Tamil Nadu, which is quite hostile. And I say this because the Chief Minister, not a fringe politician, but the Chief Minister, Madam Jayalalitha, handed a letter, a formal letter to the Indian Prime Minister asking for support for Tamil Eelam and suggesting that India push the 13th Amendment to the point that it becomes a springboard for Tamil Eelam. Now, you're really talking about a political threat of irredentism or secessionism emanating from Tamil Nadu. Sri Lanka's northern east is a vital border zone, and the Sri Lankan military must stay there for a very long time. Whether the footprint of the Sri Lankan armed forces should be the same, I think the footprint has already changed. They're not as high profile as they were. They don't have this panoptic view of the citizenry of the northeast that existed during the post-war Rajapaksa administration. I think that was excessive, quite excessive.
But there are still, for example, in KKS, the whole of KKS is an army camp. They've got a fabulous hotel there, which the army manages and runs. I think they rebuilt it as well. But after so long, surely they don't need a camp that size.
Well, that's a strategic decision for us. KKS has always been sensitive. The Tigers ran KKS for quite a while. And I think it's quite wrong for certain politicians and civil society intellectuals to say that we must demilitarize and go back to the pre-war situation, that there's no longer any reason 6 years after the conflict. I don't think it should, because the war didn't come out of nowhere, and no military in the world is going to allow a restoration of a vulnerable status quo ante. I mean, look at the Allies after World War II. The US made sure that Germany was part of NATO, and there are US bases there. So I think we have to accept that as a fact of life, and I would even say it's desirable. There has to be an army presence. It must not be intrusive. Now, not every military camp in the north, or even the very fact of a military presence, should be deemed intrusive. But if there is a heavy hand in civilian life, which I'm afraid was the case during the Rajapaksa's second term. Now that, of course, has to stop, and that has stopped. But the military must stay.
But then
in the northern
in that case, the government must get their checkbook out and the lands allocation chappie, whoever it is, and write out checks for compensation.
I think so.
And let people get on with it. They can't be waiting forever and a day and another day to restart their lives.
I agree. I would say the international community should also help out. Since this is one of their priority issues.
But perhaps in the end, the best solutions will be homegrown, because we understand, and it's ground control who knows what's available, what land can be given, and so on. But don't you think that there's this urgency? This government came in on a ticket of Palani and good governance and so on, but this is also a part of that. And it appears that there is not enough urgency on the part of this government to resolve the issues of the people of the former conflict areas and, say, Puntland and so on. And there's no urgency. Well, these people are still in the camps.
Well, for us, I'm not sure I'd agree. I think what we lack is what the government lacks is a holistic assessment. We lurch from a south-centric policy to a north-centric policy, and vice versa. I'm a little allergic to the term homegrown, because in its second term, the Rajapaksa administration kept using this, including in Geneva, which was quite ridiculous and unsuccessful. It's used as a mantra to ward off the acceptance of universality. To contradict the idea of universal human rights. It's something I never bought into, I never practiced when I was a diplomat. So I wouldn't say homegrown. What you need is a realistic perspective, one which does take into account the best practices internationally, but also understands the realities on the ground in Sri Lanka. And I don't see that happening.
Yes, the Prime Minister's stance is one. The President was more clear in what he said, and now the Prime Minister tends to be is so fortunate because the English language is rather quaint, and so his the operative word is participation, and perhaps we can discuss participation. I think the time is right for a break. So when we come back after this short break, let's discuss this word participation.
Certainly.
Stay tuned to Newsline. We're taking a short commercial break. Welcome back to Newsline, live with Dr. Jayatilaka. Doctor, the operative word, as I said, is participation. The Prime Minister in Parliament denied what he said to Channel 4.
I watched the video, but anyway.
Yes. Go ahead. Well, I mean, he said what he said.
Yes,
he said they're most probably dead. And he then said, we haven't ruled it out.
Yes, and then he said yes when he was asked about foreign participation.
Yes.
But anyway.
So, And then in Parliament he says, look, the resolution says participation. So what is this quaint word that we're talking about? How deep is this participation going to be? Are they going to be observers? Are they going to be actually participating? Can they legally participate?
You're talking about foreign participation?
Yes, yes.
Well, for us, this is the old three-card trick.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister says it was a unanimous resolution, and we are committed to its implementation.
Yeah.
But it was a unanimous resolution, not because people voted on it. Everybody didn't sort of put their hands up and vote pass a resolution. It was a consensus resolution for the very simple reason that the government of Sri Lanka co-sponsored it.
Yeah.
So no one could stand against it. But one notes that the list of co-sponsors does not include even our very good friend and close neighbor India.
Right.
Sri Lanka has signed up to a Western resolution, to the US-UK resolution. And why didn't India co-sponsor it? Because India, like almost every other Asian country and every country in the non-aligned movement, does not like the idea of foreign participation in accountability processes for very good reason. India is right. The Sri Lankan government is wrong. And the President's own statements, President Sirisena's statement to the New York Times, the same week as the Prime Minister insisted on signing up to the resolution, the President's remarks to the New York Times indicate that he was not in agreement and perhaps didn't even know about the wording. Because he told the New York Times last year that I'm opposed to the participation of foreign judges. So it's specious. It's basically a trick to say, look, this was a unanimous resolution and we are therefore committed. The government signed up to it without even, I believe, cabinet concurrence. I don't think the cabinet scrutinized the draft. Certainly the President does not seem to have done so.
So not different to what went on during the Rajapaksa years.
Not different from what went on during the CFA, when President Kumaratunga sought 24 hours to study the CFA, and Prime Minister Wickremesinghe told her that he had promised Prabhakaran that he'd sign at 5 o'clock that evening, and he's sorry he can't give the President 24 hours to study the CFA. It is the same style as the CFA. Now, for us, last Sunday, I read in the political column of the Sunday Times that a task force has already been appointed. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, or the Ministry, have sent a note to the diplomats here announcing the appointment of a task force to enforce, the word isn't mine, it's from the report, to enforce the implementation of the US resolution, the Geneva resolution. And the task force is named. Now, I belong to a religious minority and you to an ethnic minority, so I don't view things from a majoritarian point of view. I can't. But when I read the names, it struck me there's something wrong with this. 6 of the 11, I mean the majority, are from minority communities. Now, if this were through a transparent process, these were the most credentialed people available, that's fine, but this is a choice. And do you establish a task force to enforce the implementation of the Geneva resolution in which the majority of members are not drawn from the majority community? I mean, it's very insensitive, and I'm not sure that the cabinet has approved or even seen or even knows of the existence of this task force entrusted with enforcing the provisions of the Geneva resolution. Now this is the absence of transparency, the absence of due process. And if you're talking about participation, surely your own president and cabinet must participate in important decisions of this nature. I mean, it's shocking. I find it appalling for us.
we're talking about the Prime Minister and his...
and he reports to the Prime Minister's office.
Yes, and so it's all down to the Prime Minister in his set and fixed ways.
Yes, he's quite dogmatic about these things, and I don't think it'll help.
Do you think that the people of the former conflict areas, do you think that they can relax in the knowledge that something good will come and it'll come soon? Or is it just, are they going to be resigned to the fact that it's never going to happen anytime soon?
Well, it rather depends on what the political representatives of the former conflict zones in the north and east
but then it's all the same. Fit. Something always happens that comes in the way. So now it's these blessed next lot of elections. So they're all concentrating on, oh, we can't do anything because we're doing that. Then it'll be, oh, we're doing the constitution. In the meantime, these people continue to suffer. There's camps, they've only got 3 toilets there's 40 to each. Why should these people live like that?
For us, they shouldn't. I mean, I was shocked and I made my views known when we had far too many people for far too long behind barbed wire, though they weren't prisoners. Yeah. And I understand that there was a problem of demining, but still, it didn't feel right. And this was after the war, and this was during the Rajapaksa administration. So I have a serious problem with this. But I think the people of the north and east are ill-served by the unrealism of their political leaders.
That too.
And I think, and I've said this including to Mr. Sambandhan, that the TNA should take a cue from the Sinn Féin of Northern Ireland. Now, Sinn Féin did not, and I've interviewed Martin McGuinness on television, Sinn Féin didn't ask for accountability. Certainly not for international participation in any accountability hearings. Sinn Féin, as you know, is a Republican movement, but it didn't ask for Britain to become a republic. Sinn Féin did not accept the unitary British state initially, but it is operating, it chose to accept devolution within a nominally unitary state. Britain defines itself in international fora as the United Kingdom is a unitary state. Now, if it's good enough for the Catholic minority of Northern Ireland, I don't see why devolution within a unitary state and putting accountability aside isn't good enough for the Tamil minority of northern and eastern Sri Lanka. It works. The Good Friday Agreement works. If the Sinn Féin IRA had pushed for accountability, there would not have been a Good Friday Agreement. There is no accountability provision in the Good Friday Agreement, and the Good Friday Agreement is a success story. So do we want a success story of taking the Sinhalese along, of taking the military along, or do we want some diaspora-driven notion of accountability and justice which conforms to Western notions of what they owe their Tamil voters?
Just moving on a little bit back to Prince Hussein's visit. He spoke of a meeting he had with a rape victim. But this is during the JVP.
JVP, yes.
Does that indicate that the coverage of the UN of this investigation has been sort of expanded now?
Well, the Human Rights High Commissioner spoke about a number of things which he's not entitled to according to his mandate. He spoke about what a country should do after conflict. He spoke about constitutional reform in Sri Lanka. Now, I've been a vice president, elected as a vice president of the UN Human Rights Council. And I know what the High Commissioner should and shouldn't talk about. He is the world's top bureaucrat. On the subject of human rights. He heads the office of the High Commissioner. He doesn't even represent the Human Rights Council, which is an intergovernmental body. He's not the Secretary General of the United Nations. He cannot advise on what you do in a post-war situation. He talks about 4 components. Truth-seeking, accountability, and so on. Now, what each country does after war is the sovereign decision of that country.
Yeah.
And he's gone way out to talk about all of that.
There'll be a good section of the people in this country who say to him, or who may say to him, look, why don't you go and sort out the problems you're having in the Middle East, Syria, and even in his own country, where his brother is the head of state, and say, look, you guys go and sort that out. We have Donald Trump who says that it's not just waterboarding, he'll do something even worse than that. And here there was a US president who actually authorized waterboarding, not once, not twice, but 123 times on the same individual.
Faraz, there have been massacres committed by US forces in Afghanistan, US and British forces in Iraq. How many of those have been prosecuted? I mean, I'm going by American sources.
Yeah.
So there's clearly double standards here. And what is worse is that what we are urged to do and what the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister say we are committed to doing is something that no other country, and I mean no other country in the world, has done 6 years after civil war. Yes. Now, we are a democracy. This is not a military dictatorship that fought the war. But even military dictatorships, such as in Latin America, it's taken 30 to 40 years to look back and hold them to account, and that has been deliberate. Because a generation or two must graduate so the wounds have healed and this is not lacerating. You've had huge conflicts, massacres, 1.5 million people were killed, unarmed people, in Indonesia from 1965 onward. And the democratic transition didn't involve accountability hearings. There are reasons for that. No country, especially a democracy, which has fought a war against a terrorist movement, prevailed, then decides to have a lacerating accountability hearing, still less with foreign participation. Half a decade after the war has ended. Now, they don't do this not because they're not committed to justice, but because it is not wise and it isn't right. Now, we are being urged to do this, and part of our government, I say a part because I'm not sure that the President shares those views, says we are committed to doing it. And I think this is disgraceful. I also think that it will cause, and I'm being euphemistic here, serious social disequilibrium.
We may have to discuss social disequilibrium on another program because we've run out of time. But Dan Jayatilaka, thank you very much for being on Newsline. We appreciate your presence here. Do come back on another program.
Thank you, Faraz.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for watching Newsline. It's been a pleasure having Dr. Jayatilaka with us. We'll wish you a very good day. Take care and God bless.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.